You don't need to fight to win. You don't need to shout louder, or explain yourself better, or even set the record straight. That's not power. That's a distraction. Real power is when you stop giving them something they can't survive without your reaction. See, manipulators don't need truth. They don't need logic. They don't even need to be right. They only need you to stay plugged into the emotional current they've engineered. And once you're in, they drain you, bend you, control you. But what happens when the plug gets pulled? No more energy, no more narrative, no more game. Because the second you stop reacting, you stop being a player on their board. They can provoke, they can push, they can poke, but they're talking to a wall that no longer echoes back. They don't spiral because you walked away. They spiral because they no longer have access to your nervous system, to your validation, to your emotional attention. And that's what breaks them. Not the argument, not the goodbye, but your absence of noise. Now ask yourself, what if your silence wasn't weakness, but their worst nightmare? Because that's what we're unlocking today. Not just how to ignore, not just how to disengage, but how to withdraw psychologically so clean, so complete, that even if you're standing in the same room, they can no longer touch your mind. Let's begin. With stillness, with calculation, with total control. Mental withdrawal isn't about leaving the room. It's about becoming unreachable inside it. See, most people think power is loud, obvious, tactical, but the most devastating kind of power goes silent. Not weak, not gone, just unplugged. And here's the twist most manipulators never prepare for. You're still there. You're still physically present, still breathing, still blinking, still in the room, but you're no longer open. They try to read you, but you've stopped transmitting. They try to push you, but there's no button left to press. That's what breaks them. Manipulators don't need your love. They don't need your fight. They just need one thing: your response. To prove they still have access. To confirm you're still in play. But now you're not playing. You're quiet. Not passive. Deliberately still. You're not giving them a storm to surf. You're giving them an ocean with no waves. And it's terrifying. Because the moment you mentally unplug, they lose their script. Their frame collapses. Their pacing stutters. Their emotional rhythm goes out of sync. They don't know where you stand because you're not standing anywhere on their map. That's the invisible exit. The moment you become physically present, but psychologically closed, emotionally sealed, energetically unavailable, and they feel it. Oh, they feel it. It's not about ignoring someone. It's about making their attempt to access you to feel like trying to send a signal through stone. Their voice bounces. Their logic loops. Their tactics echo in an empty hallway. That's when the panic sets in. Not because you attacked, but because you didn't return, serve. Now they're the ones spinning. Repeating, over-explaining, searching for the spark you used to give so freely. But that spark is no longer for rent. Because now, you've stepped into a different kind of power, non-reactive presence. Power that doesn't perform. Power that doesn't announce itself. Power that stays but doesn't belong to them anymore. And that's when you become dangerous. Because they can't provoke what they can't reach. And they can't manipulate what they can't read. You're still here. But you've exited. Silently. Completely. Untraceably. If some part of you felt this wasn't just a tactic, but a necessary shift, you're already outgrowing the game. Subscribe. Not for noise, but for silence that rewires the room. When you stop reacting, you don't just create silence. You dismantle the control structure they've been feeding off. See, manipulators don't survive off chaos. They survive off how you respond to it. They don't crave conflict. They crave your attention during conflict, your emotional bandwidth, your effort to explain, to fix, to decode them. But here's the shift. You don't have to slam the door. You don't even have to leave the room. You just need to mentally exit. No announcements. No declarations. No dramatic move. Just presence without participation. They speak. You don't engage. They escalate. You stay still. They wait for a trigger. You give them nothing, and that nothing starts eating at them. Why? Because when you withdraw the mental currency, you collapse the entire psychological economy between you. They no longer get paid in reaction, no longer earn emotional leverage, no longer collect control. You've cut their supply chain, and you've done it without swinging a single sword. Let's break it down. When you stop returning messages, not because you're angry, but because you're not reachable at that level anymore, that's not absence. That's control. When they call you out and you no longer explain you, no longer justify you, no longer even register their pressure, that's not being cold. That's being unbuyable. They try their tactics, but there's no response loop. And without the loop, they lose their rhythm. The room changes. The pacing dies. The power leaks out of their words. Because power, when left unanswered, turns into doubt. Now they're the ones questioning, did I go too far? Did I lose them? Are they done? Why aren't they flinching? Why aren't they folding? You've taken away the gavel from their hand. And they don't even know when it happened. That's the brilliance of withdrawal. You don't resist. You don't react. You simply remove yourself from being programmable. They say something cruel. You pose. You breathe. You look, but you don't respond. And in that stillness, 1,000 calculations die in their mind. Because what's a strategy? When the opponent won't play, what's the use of bait? When no one's biting, what's the power of shame? When you don't accept the delivery, they're left holding weapons, but the battlefield has turned to fog. Their lines fall flat. Their push lands in air. Their energy loops back to them because you've stopped absorbing, and they realize something. You're not just not arguing. You've removed the permission to be affected. That's when you become invisible. But more than that, you become unmovable. The person they once poked, triggered, adjusted like a switchboard, no longer flickers. And in a world built on reaction, stillness becomes a tactical blackout. You didn't break the system. You simply unplugged. And without your energy, the whole thing starts to rot. Quietly, slowly, fatally. They collapse. And you don't even have to watch. They collapse. And you don't even have to watch. Because by the time they break, you're already gone. To truly disappear, you don't need to walk away. You just need to shift dimensions. Mental withdrawal isn't about cutting people off. It's about changing frequency until they can no longer hear you, even when you're sitting right in front of them. You're still in the room, still breathing, still smiling if necessary. But they can feel it. You've gone somewhere they can't follow. And that drives them insane. Because now you've become the one person they can't predict, the one energy they can't regulate, the one response they can't extract. You've turned from player into ghost. Not absence, not rejection, something worse. You've become unreadable, untouchable, unavailable at a psychological level. And they will try to pull you back. They'll use drama. They'll use guilt. They'll cry. They'll provoke. They'll promise. They'll threaten. They'll suddenly become everything you once wished they were, just to reactivate the connection. But you're not cold. You're just no longer on that frequency. You've upgraded your internal software, rebuilt your emotional operating system. And in that new architecture, their chaos is no longer compatible. They don't have the login. They don't have the code. And every attempt they make bounces off a wall they didn't know existed. Because you're not withdrawing anymore. You've already withdrawn. Now, you're just observing, quietly, strategically. Drop this in the comments. I exit silently. I never return. Let the world know you've mastered the quietest kind of power. From a room they can't enter, a reality they no longer influence. And here's what makes it devastating for them. You're not hostile. You're not defensive. You're not explaining. You're just not there. Not in the way they want you to be. Not where they can reach, twist, or reroute you. You don't fight. You don't flinch. You don't fold. You just stand, in full possession of your signal. And in a world obsessed with reaction, that kind of presence feels like blackout power. You've removed their ability to map you, removed their tools, destroyed their timing, cut off the mirror. They still speak, but your silence no longer means waiting. It means arrival. You've arrived in your own mind, in your own energy field, in a space where your emotions don't leak, your thoughts aren't stolen, and your presence is self-owned. That's not detachment. That's strategic insulation. You've mastered the art of vanishing without ever leaving the scene. And when they realize you're still there, but unreachable, the game ends. Not because they lost, but because you've rewritten the rules. In silence, in stillness, in total sovereignty. Some exits don't slam the door. They close it, slowly, without noise, without warning. And that's why they echo forever. When you withdraw the right way, you don't vanish. You remain. As a silence they can't fill. as a presence they can't replace. They don't remember what you said. They remember that you stopped showing up where they once had control. You didn't explain. You didn't punish. You just became unreachable. And that changes the entire game. Because real withdrawal isn't emotional. It's energetic. So now choose one space, one relationship, one emotional loop that still drains you, and begin your quiet exit. Not with distance, with signal loss, not with blocking, with stillness, not to punish, but to return your power to where it belongs, inside. Let them talk. Let them guess. Let them realize the only connection they lost was the one you chose to no longer maintain. Because the quietest exits leave the deepest fractures. And if this didn't just teach you withdrawal, but made you feel it, subscribe now. Quiet power is rare, but once you hold it, you never give it up again. This isn't about being distant. It's about becoming untouchable. Hit subscribe before the next manipulator finds your frequency. And share this with someone who keeps explaining their worth. Maybe it's time they vanish strategically. Because in the end, no one forgets the person who exited without ever turning around.